Hi, in this lecture I'm going to wrap up our discussion of creating web pages, and I'll be focusing primarily on cascading style sheets or CSS, but I'll also talk a little bit about the way the internet works in general, and I'll also be introducing some additional HTML tags. So let me show you how I have things organized to start with. So before we start getting into the details of the code, I want to show you the big picture here. I have a folder titled Starter Kit CSS, and within that folder I have a web page analyze1.htm, which contains HTML5 code but does not contain any CSS code to format it. So we'll take a look at the content of the web page in an unformatted way. Then we'll take a look at a second page which contains the same HTML but contains internal CSS. And then eventually what I intend to do is to create a third web page, analyze3.htm, and have it reference the same CSS rules from an external file. Now that may not mean a lot to you right now, but before the end of the lecture this should make perfect sense. I have a file called cheat.txt, and the reason for that file will become apparent as I work through some of the CSS and HTML code. And then I also have a file style lib.css, which contains external CSS rules. And again, that won't mean a whole lot to you immediately, but as we work our way through this lecture, everything should make a great deal of sense. I also have a folder called pics, and within this folder I have a number of pictures, some of which I use in this in these two web pages. So you'll see again, what I'm doing with that when the time comes. Okay, so let me open the first web page, the one that is not formatted, the one that does not use CSS, and I'm going to open it in a browser. I'll open it in Firefox, and as you can see, there's really not a lot of formatting. Now, to say that there is no formatting is not quite right, but the formatting here is very, very crude and basic. So I'm using, I can't remember, but probably an H1 tag to create the larger, bold block style print that you see highlighted. And then following that, I have the next line contained within paragraph tags, so it's treated as a separate unit, and there's a blank line inserted after the paragraph automatically because of the paragraph tag. Then I'm using a ordered list in order to identify each one of these different HTML elements that I'm going to be working with and demonstrating. I have a picture that's being inserted through an image tag, and you'll notice that everything up to this point is left aligned, right? Then I have a diagram that shows the way the web pages are accessed across the internet. So what we've focused on is authoring web pages in a language called HTML5. And before the lecture's over, you'll also know how CSS can be incorporated into the authoring of web pages. But once the content is developed on the machine that the author is using, then the next step would be to transfer those pages elsewhere where anyone and everyone on the internet could have access to them. And then that's what this diagram is going to explain. Okay, so at a glance, at the bottom I also have a table set up, and within the table I have a picture, and I have some hyperlinks on both picture and text, and we'll analyze the details of this. Okay, so the first part of this will serve more or less as a review of HTML, and then it'll give you the background that you need in order for us to look at how this can be improved by formatting it. So I think I'll close this and then just show you this second page. I'll open it with Firefox again. And now what you see is there is a silver color background, and this diagram is centered, and I believe the formatting of the table is a little bit different, with the heading having some color added to it. So there's clearly been some changes, but the content is the same. Okay, so the text is character by character the same that we saw in the previous web page. The picture is the same picture that we saw previously. The only thing that's changed is, this now has been enriched with some formatting details that is done through cascading style sheets, or CSS. Okay, and so let's take a look here at analyze1.htm. And to do this, I may want to flip back and forth between viewing it and looking at the program code. So I'm going to go ahead and open it in Expression Web 4. And as I had indicated in a Word document previously, this software is available to be downloaded from the internet for free. I just did it yesterday. I have a Microsoft Surface computer, and I haven't taken the time. I just recently got it, and I haven't taken the time to install much software on it. So I decided that I would just check to see whether or not, in fact, Expression Web was available for free on the internet, and it is from Microsoft's website. So if you Google for free Expression Web 4.0 download, or words similar to that, you should have no problem finding Microsoft's website where it's available. And then if you just follow the instructions, which are very brief and very straightforward, you should be able to install it on your computer with a Windows operating system. Okay, so I'm assuming that you're able to do that. And I'm going to open this now with Expression Web. And when I do, it's opening in Design View. So this is very similar to the way the browser will present things. Okay, so you understand the role of the browser is to read the HTML and CSS instructions, and then render the text and pictures and so forth on the web page the way the author has described it. And so this is just, sorry for the pause there. I'm sitting outside right now doing this, and there's a lot of ambient light, so I was looking at the screen, and it appeared that there was a background color added to this. So I don't think so. I think it's just the way the light's striking my computer screen. So let's take a look at what we have going on here. Okay, so everything is left aligned, and again, that's bold block style print, so I'm guessing that that is being done some way, somehow, with a heading tag, an H tag, and this appears to be a separate entity. In fact, when I click on it, Expression Web shows that that is a paragraph. You see the P and then the outline that corresponds with it. And then there is also this structure that you see here, which is being done through an ordered list, an image tag to create the picture, and then another image tag to create this picture. So that said, let's see whether or not it really contains those kind of elements. So we're going to flip over to the code window, and I'll scroll up, and you'll notice that I have a doc type tag that says HTML, so that's telling the browser anticipate the code that follows to be written according to the HTML5 standard. Then I have the opening HTML tag. I have a very minimal head section where I tell it the encoding scheme that I want to use, and I also tell it the title to put in the title bar, and that's been discussed previously. Then I have the body section. Now, let me back up. I have the head section. Okay, again, point out the fact that it is minimal. One place that I can put CSS is in the head section, and in the next web page you'll see that being done. But as I look at that head section, I say, no CSS rules, so that's suggesting. Not only is it suggesting, it's telling me flat out that this web page is not using CSS. All right, so I continue on with the body tag, and there is a break to create just a little bit of space at the top. For whatever reason, I chose to do that. Then I, in fact, did use an H1 tag to make the text analyze this exclamation up here, bold and block style. And there is, in fact, a paragraph that provides this summary information following the announcement, analyze this. And there is, in fact, a ordered list, and this is a very straightforward ordered list. I don't have any further nesting of list within this structure. Okay, so in a previous example lecture, you saw a list structure that had a unordered list nested within an ordered list. Okay, so this is a lot simpler. Now, one thing I'll point out is that I wanted to display the text as it would appear for a heading tag. That is, a left angle brace followed by the character H1, followed by the character 1, followed by the character H, and followed by the character 1, and then followed by greater than. Now, the problem is I want that to display to the user, but I don't want the text to be confusing the browser. Okay, so how do I, reconcile that conflict? Well, if you look here, you'll notice that anywhere I want a left angle brace, I reference it with the special characters &LT. If you want to display a left angle brace so that the browser doesn't confuse the actual left angle brace with the beginning of a tag, then if you want to display a left angle brace, it has to be written as &LT. Okay, and if I want to display a right angle brace, then it has to be referenced as &GT. Okay, so you can take a look at that. You'll notice that I did that consistently throughout. All right, so I'm using headings, paragraphs, the anchor tag or a tag to create hyperlinks. There's going to be a table in here, so let's go back to design window, and you see that there is this listing of all the elements, the HTML5 elements that are used to construct a page, items 1 through 10, and then there's a picture following that. So here is the ordered list from beginning to end, and then what I have following that is an image tag that's wrapped up in a paragraph tag. Okay, so you'll notice that preceding the image tag is a paragraph tag, and I have done something wrong and I'm just picking up on it. This is some old program code, and I didn't get it corrected. This was originally an example that I created in XHTML, and if you look at this image tag very closely, it's written to the XHTML standard. Now, had I used the W3C, and if you go online and just Google for this, W3C HTML code checker will probably get you to it. The W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, which is an association that was developed through the cooperation of the major industry and government agencies at the time. The W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, is in charge of creating and enforcing standards for internet content, and they have on their website a code checker where you can copy the code from your web page, paste it into a form, click a button, and it will tell you whether or not the code you've written is compliant with whatever standard. So it would look at my doc type tag and say, he specified the HTML5 standard, and if I had checked this code, it would have told me that those image tags are wrong. Okay, so that is the correct syntax for HTML, or for XHTML, but if I want to make this syntactically correct for HTML5, then I need to end these tags differently. Okay, so in XHTML, any singular tags, as in the break tag, which is wrong right there, and the image tag and the break tag are two tags that we have been using. Those in XHTML end with space, / greater than in previous versions of HTML, and then they revised this sort of backwardly in HTML5. They went back to the previous standard in HTML versions 1 through 4, and in HTML version 5, image tags simply end with a closing right angle brace, not a space / right angle brace as it was in XHTML. Okay, so I had some code in here that was old and did not get corrected. The difference between XHTML and HTML5 is not all that, there isn't all that many differences. In general, HTML5 is simpler to write than XHTML. So as the language evolved from HTML4 to XHTML, they created more and more complex rules, and it got so complex that people were resisting it, and that's why with HTML5 they kind of reverted back to some of the previous syntax requirements to simplify the language, and that was really the death knell for XHTML, is that it just got a little bit too complicated for people to use. Okay, so now let me look at the design here, and you'll notice that it didn't change anything when I changed those image tags and when I changed the break tag. Alright, so in my code window, then I see the ordered list. I see that I have 2 images, okay, and on the image tags, according to HTML5, there are 2 required attributes. So you're looking at one attribute or a component of the tag that adds additional detail, and that is the alt attribute. So the alt attribute is used in case the picture doesn't load, and it's also used by software that is used by blind people. So if you have a text to voice translation software, when it encounters a picture, it wouldn't know what to do with it otherwise, and where a picture occurs, then the translation software will read the alt attribute in place of showing the picture. Okay, so the second attribute is the SRC attribute, and that is then referencing a picture that is contained in a folder called pics and a picture that is named jirash.jpg. Now I want to say a little bit about this. What I am using is called a relative address, and the relative address is relative to the page that contains the reference. So in this case, I have all my web pages inside of a folder called CSS Starter Kit, but embedded in that folder is also a folder called pics, and within the pics folder I have all my JPEG files, or all the files that are going to be imported, all the pictures that are going to be imported into the web page. So that's simply saying, starting at the location of this page, you would have to open the pics folder, and then there should be a file within that called jirash.jpg. So let's say that I had in my pics folder, I don't want to go off on a tangent too far here, but here's the pics folder. So relative to this page, if this page wants to use a picture, it has to open the pics folder, and then it finds the file right there. Now, if that file were contained within another nested folder called ABC, that wasn't in the pics folder, but rather in a folder nested within pics called ABC, then, if I can find this, back here, my web page. Camtasia. There it is. Sorry about the delay. If I had stored that picture in a nested folder called ABC, then the value of the source attribute would have been pics/abc/jirash.jpg. Okay, so hopefully that's clear to you. Some HTML generators, and the HTML generator that was used, that was supported by Microsoft prior to Expression Web, was one called Front Page, and it was particularly bad about this. Some HTML generators have some real issues trying to generate relative paths, and in the web, if the HTML generator gets confused, it might create a path C:\\, /CB /users / pics, or slash rather jirash.jpg. It might create a full path beginning with the root directory known as an absolute path. And in general, relative paths are much safer than absolute paths, because again, as I develop the content on this computer, it is likely, that I will want to eventually transfer everything over to another computer where it can be published. If my source attributes contain references to absolute file paths, then that means that the files that this web page uses on the computer that it's going to be published on has to exactly match the file system on the computer that was used to develop it. And that is likely not going to be the case. On the other hand, if I use relative file paths, so long as I transfer that entire folder over, in this case Starter Kit CSS, if I transfer that entire folder over, then everything remains constant within that folder. So still, even though I might move it to a different computer, if I move the entire folder over, still the pics folder is in the same location relative to the web page that's using it. And the jirash.jpg file, if it's within the pics folder, is still in the location, same location relative to the web page. whether or not it's on the development computer or whether it's on the server where it will eventually be published. So hopefully I've made it clear as to what an absolute file path is and what a relative file path is. And again, relative file paths are what you want to use, not absolute file paths. And I say that with this bit of caution, that if you use an HTML generator like ExpressionWeb, like Front Page, like whatever other HTML generator you might eventually use, if you're creating hyperlinks or if you're creating images, go back and inspect the program code very carefully, because sometimes they don't get it right. Sometimes those HTML editors put in absolute file paths, which will trip you up. You'll think everything is fine as you develop it, but as soon as you publish it, all the links, all the pictures begin to break. All right, so I have a couple pictures. I have a break tag, and then I have a table. So if I go back to design view, after that second picture, then I have this table, and you'll notice that table has 2 rows and 2 columns. And if I look at the table, knowing what we know about tables now, there are, there is row 1, and within row 1 I have column 1, I have column 2. In row 2 I have within it column 1, column 2. But the difference here is that on the second row I display more than just content. I associate that content with hyperlinks. And then the table ends. Okay, so you should be able to analyze that program code, and the table should make perfect sense. There you have it, the web page without any CSS formatting. Okay, and if I close this up, and I'll say yes to that. So the changes I made to the image tag and to a break tag now have been permanently recorded. And if I go back here and if I open this with, I'll just use Firefox again so you see everything in a consistent way, you'll notice that there's all the content that we discussed, and there is no formatting. Okay, so put that behind us, take a look at Analyze 2, and I'll open it with Firefox. And same contents there, it's just that things are a little bit different. The formatting is different. Okay, so there are at least 3 different things that have occurred in terms of formatting. One is the back color of the page, and so it's no longer white, now it's silver. The picture, the second picture is centered, whereas it was left aligned previously. And the top row of this table has had some color added to it. Okay, so let's take a look and see what is making that happen. So if I close this up and open it now with ExpressionWeb, you're going to see page and then the code. In the head section, okay, starts out with the same doc type tags, opening HTML tag, and then the head section contains a link to a file called stylelib.css. Okay, now I didn't look at this closely. This is using external CSS. I had intended to show you internal CSS, but that's fine. I'll go ahead and explain external CSS, then I'll transform a third page into internal CSS. Okay, so let's just take a look at what it's doing. Okay, it's in the head section. The head section is exactly the same as before, except there is a link. There's a link tag, and that link has a hyperlink reference to a file called stylelib.css, and that too is a relative address. Okay, so in the absence of any file path information like pics / this or that, if all I do is reference the file name, then it is understood that that file is in the same folder as the web page requesting it. So in that same folder, the CSS Starter Kit folder, I should find a file called stylelive.css. Okay, so for the most part, you can just copy and paste this anytime you want to set up a link to a file that contains CSS rules. But otherwise, the only thing you really need to change is the value of the href attribute, and that needs to be, again, the name of the file that you want to store your CSS rules in. Okay, so somehow, like magic, then this page is using those CSS rules. So how's that happening? Well, it's happening down here in the body section. And in the body section, you will see that I have many places attributes called class. Okay, so in the body tag, I'm using a attribute called class. I have a special type of tag that's used to set up a boundary area called a div tag. It's using an attribute called class. I have a paragraph tag down here that's using an attribute called class. I have a TD tag down here that's using a attribute called class. Okay, so class is an attribute that you set equal to the name of a CSS rule. Okay, so let me back up here again. So where it says on the body tag, class equal background style, or where on the div tag it says class equal center style, there are CSS rules by these names. These are rules that I've created, and they are rules that have been given the names background style, center style, header style, and so forth. So let's take a look and see what these rules look like now. Alright, so the web page is calling up rules, and it knows about those rules because it is linked through this link tag in the head section to a file called stylelive.css. Okay, so I'm just going to minimize this for a moment, and here's stylelive.css. And if I open up stylelive.css, it starts out /* programmer /, and then the next line /* created 8/4/2010, and concludes with /. The first 4 lines are examples of comment statements. One thing that I might want to do is insert straightforward English-like comments in this file so that after 4 years has elapsed, if I go back and look at these rules, then my straightforward comments may jog my memory as to what I was doing. Or if someone else, if I write these rules, for the company that I'm working for or something, and then I leave and someone else inherits my work that did not write the rules, then these comment statements may help them wrap their head around what's going on within the file, within the rules. Okay, so there is a rule right here. My first rule is highlighted, and I've given it the name main heading. So there are 3 components to a CSS rule, and the first component appears on the first line. Okay, so here's first component. It's known as a class selector. The name that is used to identify this component part of a CSS rule is class selector. And you'll recognize the class selector because it is the initial line of the CSS rule, and it is also preceded with the dot operator, which you mere mortals may also understand to be a period. Okay, so We have the class selector, and that's usually some kind of descriptive name that describes what these rules do. This is a rule that's used for formatting the main heading of a web page, apparently. Then I have the next part of this, the body of the CSS rule begins with an opening brace and concludes with a closing brace, and within that body I have a property name and a property value. Property name, property value. In most cases, these property names and property values, certainly all property names, are reserved words, are words that you must use. You can't invent your own words. So for instance, the class selector is a programmer-defined name, but font-family is a reserved word in the CSS language. You must, if you want to specify the font style that you want to use, you must use the font-family property. And so it'll be property : and then in most cases the property value is also going to be a reserved word. Not always, but in most cases. So where it says color, that's the property, and the property value is red. Where it says font weight, the words font weight are the property, and the value is bold, which again is a reserved word. For font size, I can put any integer value that I want, and then follow that with PT as in point. So what is a point? A point is 1/72 of an inch, just to give you some idea. So what I'm doing is making that the font size, the height, then 28/72 of an inch. And the text align property value is set to a reserved word value center, and that should be, apparent. And all that in combination makes up a single CSS rule that can be referenced by the class selector name main heading. Now, what I've done over time is when I create CSS rules, I drop them in this folder and I just keep adding to it. So down here near the bottom, you should see something like center style. That was a CSS rule that was referenced in maybe a div tag. I can't remember which one it was used in. Header style was another one that was used. Okay, so these are rules that are just inserted into a text file that was created originally in Notepad, into a text file with a that has been named with a .css file name extension. That's important. So in order to do this, in order to store these CSS rules externally, they have to be put into a file with a .css file name extension. And then you can take any property, any collection of property and property values and group them together, and collectively they become a rule. Okay, now you may wonder also what this is. There's two ways that I can describe colors, and one way is to use reserved words like red and black and white and things like that. Another way is to describe their red, green, and blue color saturation using an obscure numbering system called hexadecimal or base 16. And so I don't want to go off on a tangent. If you take the CPSC 1200 class, I'll get into this in more detail, but in hexadecimal, the lowest value is a 0. It's a base 16 number system, so the lowest value is a 0, and the highest value is an F, so it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, and the highest value is in F. And if I want to indicate the color black, which would be the absence of all colors, I did pay attention in art class when I was in school. Black is the absence of all colors, and white is the presence of all colors, okay? So if I want to denote black in hexadecimal using this red, green, blue color saturation scheme, then I would indicate black is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, no colors. If I wanted to indicate white, the presence of all colors, if you've ever taken the primary colors and put them into a color wheel and turned it in front of a projector, they used to do this back in the old days in science classes, so that you could see when those colors are spun together very rapidly, blended together very rapidly, it'll produce white light. White light would be FF for red, FF for green, FF for blue. So as you look at HTML code, if you ever see that, rather, interesting notation, that's what it is. It's describing the amount of red, green, blue color saturation in hexadecimal form. Okay, so doing the same thing up here. Now, you may say, geez, why in the heck would you ever want to do something like that? Well, here's the reason you'd want to do it, is because some of the more common colors are named with a word, like red, a reserved word like red. But if I want dark red, light red, maroon, some colors that contain certain amount of red saturation, but maybe other colors like brown or something, I don't know, then I can describe very precisely how much saturation I want by the numeric value assigned to each one of the red, green, blue color components. All right, well, that is intended to be just a quick presentation there of what that's all about. And again, if you find this intriguing, we'd love to recruit you as a computer science major, and also then have you go on and take the CPSC 1200 class as an online class later on this summer. All right, so kind of backing up, I have all my rules here and in this external file, and I want to just one more time ingrain this, okay? Remember, there's a rule called header style. Remember, there's another rule called center style, right? There's another rule called background style. Header style, background style, center style. Close that up. Go back to my document, and what do I see? I see a reference to center style. I see a reference to center style again. I see a reference to background style. Okay, so I'm pulling in those rules by assigning them as the class attribute value. I use the class selector name as the value for the class attribute on the tags within the within the body of the HTML. Okay, now I want to say just a few things. Sometimes I want to take several lines and treat them logically the same way in terms of formatting. If that's the case, I would use a div tag. Okay, I just take whatever it is. That could be 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 different HTML statements. And if I want to apply the same formatting to all those, the easy way to do it is to surround those statements that need to be treated as a group, surround them by an open and closed div tag, and then assign a rule to the class attribute of the div tag. And that's what I did there. I can also invoke a rule through a paragraph, as I've done down here. So center style would apply to everything within that paragraph. And what I did was I wrapped those pictures up in paragraph tags. So paragraph tags become a convenient way to surround things that you want to apply a rule to, multiple things that you want to apply a rule to. And again, the TD tag down here is going to apply that rule, but only apply it to that one single cell within the table. So I can, through the div tag, apply a rule very broadly within the page, and in a paragraph tag, with a little less granularity. And there's also a span tag that allows me to, if I want to apply a rule to a single character within a string of text, or, as in the case of the TD tag here, again, I can apply that rule in a very narrowly scoped way to a single cell within a table. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, and that is an example of how external CSS works. Now, what I had really planned to do was to show you the way internal CSS works to begin with. So what I'm going to do, I'm kind of taking this in an order that I hadn't really planned to, but the same information can be communicated a variety of ways, so it's not necessarily a problem. What I'm going to do now is show you how internal CSS works, and I'm going to open the analyze1.html HTML file. I'm going to open it with Expression Web. Now remember, this is the file that contains the information we saw previously, but it doesn't have any formatting applied to it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tag. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background color to something. Okay, I'll change that background color to silver. All right. So if I go to Format, what is it? Background. Okay. So here in the Designer window, it's I make menu selections. It's going to generate the HTML. For background, I'm going to change it from automatic, that would be white, to silver. Okay, and say OK. There's the effect. And if I look at the code, what it has done is added a background property as an inline CSS rule. Inline CSS rule. Generally, I try to avoid using inline CSS because inline CSS applies a rule to a single tag. Okay, so it is very narrowly scoped, and so this could have been done as I did in my previous example by taking that rule and putting it in an external CSS file and then invoking it with a class attribute. Another way of doing it, and the way the browser has chosen to do it, is to take the rule and insert it directly into the tag, and it applies only to that one single tag, but because it's the body tag, it's going to apply the background color to the entire background of the web page. Okay, so the browser has chosen to use inline. This is an example of an inline CSS rule, one that is not used, that way of coding CSS is not used very often, but it's used by the browser in this instance. You'll notice also that it has provided me with a value of C0, C0, C0. That is the value for silver. There's my break tag. Now I wanted this part centered, so let me go back to Designer window, click on this, and actually I'm gonna do this one as well. I'm gonna center analyze this, and I'll just center analyze this. Okay, and I'll leave this left aligned. So I'll center analyze this, and I will highlight the text and go over here to the alignment tools and choose center. And now let's see the effect. This time it has added a class attribute to the H1 tag, which is the tag that was used to create that bold block style print. It's added a class attribute, and it has assigned as a value a class selector name of auto style. Now, where is auto style? Well, auto style is going to be written in the head section up here. So here's the head section, and there is a special style section that can be added within, and I now have a style called auto style 1. Okay, so it generated a CSS rule called auto style 1, and it put the CSS rule in the head section, actually in the style section embedded within the head section, but it stored it up here. And this is an example of a internal CSS rule, not putting it in a separate file, but rather it's putting it in the head section of the current page. Now, what's the advantage? If I use external CSS, then if I have a website with 100 pages and I want to use those formatting rules throughout those 100 pages, I can write the rules once, store them in the .css file, and then link to that CSS file and allow any or all of my pages to access those rules. So I can write the rule once and use them 100 times over. If I ever need to change a rule, if I get tired of silver as a background color or something like that, and want to change it to orange, then I can go in and make a change in the .css file, make a change to the external CSS rule, and the effect will cascade throughout the website. If all the web pages are using that same rule from that same common file, then if I change it in its source location, the effect will cascade throughout the website. If I use internal CSS, then only this page can use that rule. Now that rule can be invoked many times, many different places throughout this page, but only this page can use that rule. If I ever need to change the background color, on all my 100 pages, I'll have to go in and make the change on page 1, then on page 2, then on page 3. I have to change it 100 places instead of just changing it in one. But here's an example of an internal CSS rule, and I had told you before that these class selector names should be descriptive of the rule, what the rule's doing. Because this is an HTML generator, Expression Web is generating the HTML and the CSS, it doesn't know how to provide a descriptive name, so it uses the kind of generic naming convention of the first rule I create is auto-style 1, the second rule I create is auto-style 2, and there's nothing to say that you can't go in and change that. So where it says auto-style 1, if that's going to be centering the heading, I could say center head using something called camel case notation, where I don't have any embedded spaces, but where there would be two words that would be naturally phrased. Then I just continue to type a contiguous string of characters, and when the new word begins, I elevate it to uppercase. Camel case notation. Someone else dreamed this up or was smoking something funny or something and came up with this idea that if you look at that, it kind of looks like the camel. There's its head, there's its first hump, and so on and so forth. So again, known throughout the industry as camel case notation, and it's a style that's used in order to avoid embedded spaces. And I would encourage you to always use camel case notation. Stay away from embedded spaces, whether you're naming files or folders or anything else. Embedded spaces are, they'll come back and bite you at some point. the other thing this does is it puts the first brace on the same line as the case selector. I like to put it on another line. Now, having changed that to center head here, Control C, if I go back to the designer window, you'll notice that, hey, it's no longer left aligned. Why? Because I invoked it somewhere down here. I invoked a rule called Auto Style 1, which doesn't exist, but if I change that to the name that I changed it to, and then go back to the designer window, all of a sudden it works again. So hopefully that's clear. So I want to try to wrap this up because I know I've gone pretty long on this, and here's the last thing I would say. When I introduced Expression Web, I said it was a convenient way to create web pages, and it's also a way that you can learn HTML. You can use the designer window, you can do something intuitive, and then you can look at the program code that it generates. The same thing is true of CSS. When I first started learning CSS, I decided I would help someone do an independent study one summer in HTML and CSS. And I got a book about CSS. I read it, already knew HTML because I'd played around with it before. Started reading about CSS, started figuring things out. It was kind of slow and laborious. And then after a couple of days of reading from this rather dry book and spending a lot of time and effort, it occurred to me, why don't I just use, I think at that time I was maybe using Front Page, but I was using an HTML generator. Why don't I just use the HTML generator and see how it's doing it? And that's what I have done ever since. So my suggestion is, if you don't want to read a real long, dry, boring book, play around with it in the HTML editor, and then just flip back and forth between the design window, or you can go into split screen mode and watch and see how it's doing things as you develop in the designer window. But in some way, analyze that code and see how it works. Now, to wrap this up, I have that external CSS file, and what I might want to do then is take center head, that entire rule, Control C, and copy it into Style Lib. Just append it at the bottom. Leave a blank line in between to make it a little more readable. So I'm just doing a Control C to copy, a Control V to paste. And there's center head. I've added that new rule. Again, I might want to take the time, to clean up the formatting just a little bit, since I'm going to live with this. Save this file. Save. And then go back here to my cheat text document, which happens to have this link tag. I didn't want to take the time to memorize all this, so I know what this does. That's the link tag that allows a page to link to the text file that contains the external CSS rules. I've copied it, highlighted, Control C. And I'm going to open Analyze 1. I'll open it in Notepad. I could do this either in Notepad, or I could open in Expression Web. Just do it in Notepad. And so what I'm going to do, let me enlarge this full screen. What I'm going to do is take out this internal CSS rule and replace it with a link to the file that contains the external rules. And to do this, I need to remove not only the rule, but the surrounding style tags as well. And I'm going to paste my link tag that I copied from the cheat file. And now as I look at this, It's making a reference to the file that contains the external CSS rules. If I look in the body section, I see that it's going to refer to center head. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and save this file. Save, close up out of Notepad, open this in a browser. So open with Firefox, and I should see that heading centered. And there it is. Okay, so same rules being invoked, but unlike previously, the rule is not being invoked from within the head section as an internal CSS rule, but now it's being invoked through the linked file as an external CSS rule. So hopefully that's all clear to you. Now I want to wrap things up here with a little discussion about how the web pages are going to be used on the internet. Everything that I have described up to this point has had to do with authoring web pages, but once the web pages have been authored, we want to place them somewhere for public use, and that someplace would be a file server. Now there's two basic ways that web pages can be delivered to the user or to the client, as they would be known. One involves using what's called the client-side client-server model. The other one involves using the client-side client. I'm sorry, try that again. One way involves using the client-side client-server model. The other involves using the server-side client-server model. And we're only going to consider the client-side client-server model. Okay, so this other way is much more involved. If you were to go on and take additional computer science coursework, you would learn how to do this. In the server-side client-server model, the web pages and other resources reside on a server that's available to anyone who can access the page from the internet, but there's additional processing that occurs. Okay, so when the web page is called up, there is additional code that is executed that oftentimes involves having to access a relational database and either write data to the database or retrieve data that has previously been stored, and then build a custom page and send that back to the client. Okay, so it's a lot more complex. There's more being done on the server end than just what's been described up to this point. So forget this for the moment. Let's focus on the client side client-server model. And in this case, we take the web pages that we've created in HTML and CSS and possibly even JavaScript. The web pages then are stored on a server that runs some special software called a web server, and commercial brands that are very likely to be used would be IIS if it is a Windows computer that's acting as a server, or Apache if it's a Linux or Unix computer that's acting as a server. So depending upon which operating system, typically it's going to be either IIS or Apache. Those are the commercial programs that are used as web servers. And they monitor a communication port for a request from some anonymous internet user. And when that anonymous internet user makes the request, then the web server notifies the operating system. The operating system will find the web page in the file system, make sure that it is available for internet access, and if it is, then a copy of that web page will be sent back to the client, where the client's browser will interpret the HTML code and the text and the pictures and render that image on the client's computer. So let me go through that again, just to make sure it's thoroughly understood, and I'll add a little bit more detail this time around. So If I am a person that wants to use a web page that has previously been created, I would sit at a computer with a browser. I'll be known as a client in this context, and I will make a request for that web page by typing in a URL. Okay, so if we look up here at the top of the screen, well, it's not a good example. Let me just very quickly type in a URL. So I'm going to launch Internet Explorer, and it has been configured to automatically go to Google's home page by making an HTTPS, as in secure HTTP request, hypertext protocol request. This address that you see here is known as a URL. It consists of three parts. It tells the system how it wants to transfer the content, in this case using something called hypertext protocol. So that lets my system know that I want to transfer web pages as opposed to transferring other type of files with a FTP request or logging on remotely using a telnet request. So the protocol is HTTP. That's the first part that tells how to transmit. The second part is known as the domain name, and that tells the system what computer you want to access the web page from. Now, the domain name will have to be resolved into a unique identifier called an IP address. So every user-friendly server name, domain name, has a corresponding unique IP address, and there's a program that runs on servers on the internet called a domain name system server, whose job it is to take this URL request and translate the domain name into an IP address and then direct the transmission to that web server so that the client can get the web page that they're asking for. So first part is the protocol, tells how to do the data transfer, in this case hypertext protocol. Second part is the domain name, which resolves into a unique IP address by a domain name system server. And then the last part is kind of cryptic, but it is the file path. So once the domain name system server directs the transmission to the appropriate web server, then the web server is going to take that last component, the file path, give it to the operating system, and ask the operating system to return that file, that web page, so that it can be sent back electronically to the user. Okay, so there we have the URL, Uniform Resource Locator URL. It has three parts. It has the protocol, in this case HTTP or HTTPS if it's a secure transmission. The domain name, which is resolved into an IP address that tells what server to contact, and then the third part, the file path, which says once you get to that server, here's the file that I'm requesting. Okay, so the client makes a request either by entering in a URL into the address line or clicking on a web page that's currently being viewed that contains a hyperlink with that URL. Okay, so if it's an external link, the user may click on it, and that also then directs the transmission to that server. So in this diagram, I show the client on one end, I show the DNS servers, plural, on the next end. And the way this typically occurs is every client will have a DNS server that they will initially go to, and if that server cannot resolve the address, it will be configured to contact another server, and that continues up the line until a DNS server is found that can resolve the domain name into an IP address, and from that point on, then transmission is directed to the computer with that IP address, and the request will be made to that computer through a communication port. Typically for HTTP, it's port 80. And once the web server sees a request coming in on that port, it will deal with it. And if it is client-side, client-server model, then it will deal with it by looking at the file path, telling the operating system, I need that file to send back to a client. The operating system will check and make sure that the security has been set on the file in such a way that it is okay to use it as a web page, and if it is, then an electronic copy of that file is sent back to the client, and the client computer then reads the web page through a browser, and the user sees the image as the author of the web page intends for them to see it. The user's browser will read the HTML along with the CSS and possibly along with JavaScript. And that's the story of client-side, client-server computing. And if you're interested in this other model where there's additional processing that occurs on the server before a dynamic page is sent back to the client, then you'll want to enroll in another computer science class. So pretty fascinating stuff. We use this technology every day, and many people have no idea what is going on beyond just interacting with the web page. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up what I want to show you here, and then what I'm going to do is one more video that will make clear to you how to do a final project assignment.